So welcome to today's webinar on 3 engagement strategies for hybrid learning and development, hosted by Class. My name is Jimmy Monchal, and I lead part of the marketing team here at Class. I'll be moderating the conversation with our panelists today, who I'll introduce to you all in just a moment. Today, we will be talking about how workplace learning and development has changed due to the shift to a more hybrid workplace. If you have questions for our panelists, please ask them in the Q&A throughout the session. We will address those either in the moment or at the end. For those of you who are watching us at a later time, thank you so much for watching. You can email your questions to hello@class.com, and we'll get back to you there with any responses. So in just a minute, I'll go through the agenda here and introduce everybody. More and more what we're seeing is kind of just wanting to make sure that we have an opportunity to introduce Class to everybody, and then we'll go into the agenda, into the introductions. And then talk a little bit more about hybrid learning strategies, and then get into our Q&A here at the end. So that's our current agenda for today. To kick us off, though, I will just quickly talk about Class. So many businesses are adapting to use and rely on synchronous tools more than they historically have. Businesses were already doing some level of distributed working, but this last year has sped up the adoption of kind of the remote workforce. So even as we are seeing signs of relief, many organizations are planning to utilize the distributed workforce into the future. And with this shift, there are a lot of challenges in using the current tools available to kind of engage employees effectively in a hybrid workplace. And this has kind of helped lead to the idea of Class. So we were originally focused on solving the immediate need of education institutions, but we've now started to adapt the product to address the gaps we were seeing in the hybrid workplace. So, Class, what we do is we add a concrete set of training and collaboration tools built on top of Zoom, designed to enhance the Zoom's web conferencing platform that many organizations have grown to trust and are leveraging already. So with a new way to conduct team meetings, stand-ups, training, and other critical tools areas with a tool like Class, our hope is to solve the major pain points our partners have been feeling from the traditional virtual tools available. So we do encourage you to visit class.com and check out the website, videos, and other content to learn more about the product and our mission at Class. So with that, let's go ahead and get to the more pressing and fun topic, which is going to be introductions to our panelists today and going through some of our talking points. So I'm really excited for these 3 panelists. They are all very experienced in the L&D space, or just in the venture capital space as well, with Emily and her wide breadth of experience there too. So first, we have David Barone coming from us as a former VP of L&D at Comcast. So very thankful for having David join us today. We've got Emily Foote, who is the principal at Osage Venture Partners. And we've got Marcia Newfer, who is the founder at Blackshore, the former CLO at McKinsey. So a great lineup, some great companies there, and a lot of experience and insights you'll be hearing from them as we kind of go through the rest of the slides. So thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
All right, so in the first kickoff here is a fun stat here for everybody. But according to LinkedIn's 2019 Workforce Learning Report, 94% of employees say that they would stay at a company longer if it simply invested in helping them learn. So this interest in learning and development is really particularly strong among younger workers as well. LinkedIn's research found that roughly a quarter of Gen Z and millennials say learning is the #1 thing that makes them happy at work. And over a quarter, around 27% of Gen Z and millennials say their #1 reason they leave the job is because they did not have the opportunity to learn and grow. So I think this really accents the need for companies to focus on what they offer employees for learning and development, and kind of figure out ways to continue and adapt their programs in an ever-changing work environment. So let's shift our focus on corporate learning in 2020. With that transition that we just spoke to of the workforce going to a more remote environment, learning and development leaders were tasked with figuring out how to deliver training in a new way. And this has led to technology adoption by organizations to help bridge that gap. But this adds the need for employees to kind of adapt to this new technology, and not every solution kind of addresses the many different ways people learn. In addition to the adoption of technologies, there's also a boom in the technologies available on the market. Just under 60% of companies in a recent survey said they had the right technology and the knowledge necessary to run that new tech properly. So let's kind of set this up for the discussion today, and kind of what's led to bringing these great minds together. And so we'll kick off into kind of the 3 engagement strategies for hybrid learning and development. And that first one is really enhancing the human experience through technology. So one of the questions that I had for the panelists here, and I'll kind of start bringing everybody in, is how have kind of you seen companies support a hybrid learning environment with human experiences using technologies in the past? And I'll kick that over to Marcia, I think, to kick us off. Oop, I'm sorry, I got you muted.
You would think by now I would understand mute. So one great example that I've seen is Electronic Arts, the gaming company. Their values, corporate value, is inspiring the world to play, and that always informed how they did internal learning as well. Highly engaging, creative, high production values, fun, gamified, and very much in person together. So multiplayer gaming, if you will. When COVID hit and they suddenly had to go remote, that's a huge issue, right? That's a company culture that's as far from remote as you can imagine. And so they made their mantra, stay at home, play together. And everything they shifted was through that lens of how do we sustain the fun, the gamification. They had things role play and costume, which I gather is a accepted thing there. I'm not sure it would have worked at McKinsey. But it was a great example to me of using the culture to inform how you did distance learning in a way that supported the culture.
Yeah, I love that. Also a big fan of EA games, so that's also a great example, I think, too. And I love how they kind of did that, that bringing it in, and I think that's super important and critical. Emily, would you have any examples at all of maybe how you've seen companies, support that hybrid learning environment with technology?
Yeah, of course. But just a plug for EA, their CTO is actually on our advisory committee for our investment firm, and he is just fantastic. So now I can understand another reason, because he comes from culture. We actually had a CEO event for our portfolio companies yesterday, and it was really interesting. And the topic was this really: how are you thinking about your world as you're now in a new work environment, whether you're going fully back, but everybody's somewhat online now, or going fully back, going online, or doing a hybrid, and majority are doing a hybrid model. And what I thought was so interesting, our CEO from a company called Exec Online, they were hybrid before, but he said even post-pandemic, they now are starting to rethink everything. He didn't say it this way exactly, but basically what I gleaned from it is he's thinking about all of the spaces that are in their brick and mortar places. He's thinking about it from a digital first perspective. So how do you ensure that everybody who's in a remote setting does not feel like a second class citizen? And it's simple from two perspectives. From a technology perspective, where are they putting audio? So making sure it's everywhere in the room. Where are they putting that video? I was in ed tech prior to being in the investment world, and our company was in Philadelphia. We were acquired by a company from Instructure. And when I would sit in meetings when I was in Philly, in the Utah office, I was often on a video screen at the end of a long conference table. And with no malintent from anybody, I just very much felt like a second class citizen. So I loved how Stephen from Exec Online thought about this and are restructuring the rooms. And then the second point on that, it's not only a technology play, but also a management play. So and it's just good management, whether it's all in person or all online or hybrid, but how are you, for example, ensuring every voice is heard no matter where you're sitting, so that you ultimately feel like you're all together. And the last point I'll say in that, it felt very analogous to me of when tech companies had started thinking, I'm designing mobile first. So the mobile experience is amazing. I think the hybrid world has shifted now to you have to think digital first, as opposed to how we used to think before, which was how do you have this great in-person experience?
And digital was kind of the secondary. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Marcia.
Could I build on that? Because digital first, but also such creativity was forced, right? If, all the research on creativity says boundary conditions actually help. McKinsey has this event where we take all of our new engagement managers to Cambridge University in England, both for knowledge building, connection to one another, connection to the firm. And nobody could conceive of Cambridge as a virtual event. I mean, the whole point was this 700 person event. And of course, they had to totally rethink it last year. And they did great things I'm not going to go into, but now the future model is going to be different, right? It's going to be a hybrid model because they're like, there's some things that worked better. And so how do we bring the best of both together? So I think it's really forced creativity as opposed to technology being the second class, the fallback choice.
No, I love it. And I think that kind of, we were talking earlier on as a panel as we were getting prepped, in synchronous and asynchronous and kind of how those options come in. So, David, I'd look to you, like, how does offering synchronous and asynchronous options enhance learning for employees?
Well, I mean, a couple of things we've been proving out in the L&D space, kind of even pre-pandemic about asynchronous, is that, we're hearing that learners, they want to learn at their own pace, mainly because everyone doesn't start the same reference point or comprehend the same way. So that's one thing there. Also, we've learned that when learners kind of take responsibility for what they need to learn, their aptitude and their confidence is so much better. And unfortunately, I think in the synchronous approach, you get everyone in the room together and you're kind of training to that class average. So I think, although we're making some good strides on the asynchronous side, I think we took a step backwards when we got into basically what we're doing now with a lot of our virtual stuff. And I think people are getting comfortable with the distance learning, which is great because that took a while to get over. But I think people are still learning at the same pace. So we got to figure out how to combine the virtual piece, the more synchronous piece with asynchronous and make that engaging, make it collaborative. So I think there's some work to be done. I think people are figuring it out. But when the pandemic came, I don't think people were looking to put new platforms in place. They had to pivot so fast. They just had to see kind of like what's in the attic. Let's grab it, let's make it work, and let's survive the next year and a half.
Definitely, that makes sense. Yeah, I'd open it up to the rest of the panelists. Emily, maybe I see you're trying to answer there. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to what Dave was saying, I think one thing that I'll be very sad about if this happens, if we come out of the pandemic, is if we use technology to do models that we know won't support the development of 21st century skills. So if we use technology just to transfer knowledge, like what I'm doing, like just talking to people right now. But if we use it to foster, like to Dave's point, collaboration and giving everybody like differentiation for what levels they're on. And I think technology has the power to let us do that if we're more intentional and thoughtful. Then the pandemic, that'll be one amazing silver lining from the pandemic. But if we don't do that, I think we'll have lost a massive opportunity.
Yeah, I love the way you're talking about it from like an equity type perspective too, and making sure that it, whether you're at home or this hybrid type model, like having the ability to feel like you're in that room, you have a seat at the table. I'm looking at some questions that are coming in from the Q&A, and they're asking things around, how do we use like a flipped model or a flipped classroom, I should say, and get people to consume the content ahead of time so there's a better discussion? Like, how do we continue to drive a different type of approach to meetings, maybe in this more virtual environment that allows better discussion to happen, and better topics to come up. And so, yes, I think I really like the points that are being made, and it would be a shame if we missed out on this opportunity, I think, to take that next step and to continue to have a better remote and this overall remote workforce, an environment for everybody to feel, involved in. So I love that.
And Jimmy, I think, as we talk about the hybrid piece, it gets back to Emily's point about sitting at the end of the table. If you've got 2 people remote and 10 people in a classroom, you got to figure out how to make it equitable for all. And I think asynchronous does a little of that because they can kind of learn at their own pace. But I think when you pull them together for that virtual event, we got to think that through and make it a little bit more of a less than an us versus them. So I think we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Anything else we want to add on that one before we jump to their next tip for engaging? Awesome. The second one is really to invest in and kind of train on the right tools. And so when we think about that one, one of the main questions that we had early on was, what kinds of technology do we kind of predict will be best or will be used to best support hybrid learning and development in the future? So David, I know you had a pretty good idea here when we first spoke. So where would you start with that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, so to really help with that support of that hybrid, I think at our company, I think the company that can see, we talked about before, can seamlessly combine synchronous and asynchronous learning. Right now, it seems to be two discrete platforms or technologies. So I think whoever can combine that, I think will come out the winner. But we also have to replicate the social aspect. Because I know at Comcast, if you flew a cohort in for a corporate HQ meeting or event or training, 9 times out of 10, the people there would say the best part of the event, yeah, the training was good, but the networking was great. I learned from my peers, and a lot of it's happening outside the classroom on the break. So if you can figure out a way to kind of capture that and get the asynchronous, I think we'll be in a great position. Jamie Dimon the other day was just talking about how he was saying that remote work doesn't work for young kids. And I've got a son in the basement right now that works for Dimon, and he's down there. He's new to the company. He hasn't met people. It's very tough to really develop great relationships through video. So there's that: see people, talk to them after work, talk to them walk into the car. Those types of things I think we have to really capture to really win out that technology.
The great analogy somebody used with me, and I'm totally plagiarizing here, was, we have figured out how to do collaborative work online, collaborative projects in a learning context. We haven't figured out how to create the Bumble effect, the dating app, where you want a relationship that extends outside of the app in a more continuous way, right? That kind of bonding that happens at programs. And I think that's kind of the gold standard. We got to sort out, find a way to do it.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a McKinsey report, Marsha, actually, that I saw the other night when I was prepping for our CEO event. And they were saying, obviously, the biggest impact of this from a labor force is just the move to remote. And they consider remote work that can be done without a loss of productivity. So they looked at tasks, and they found that about 20 to 25% of the workforces in advanced economies could work from home between 3 to 5 days. But what was interesting to me, I was like, well, if they're productive and working from home, why not 5 days? Like, what's the 3? And then they went on to talk about, like, what are those things that are really hard to do online? Not that they can't be done online, but just hard. And it's, to Dave's point with his son in the basement, and what Marsha was just saying, it's coaching, it's providing feedback, it's building customer and team relationships, it's onboarding new employees, negotiating, and then all of those things that benefit from collaboration, like innovation. Those are really difficult to do online. But I think the positive from a learning perspective online with those things is what Dave was saying with the asynchronous, is you give people this opportunity to go at their own pace, to fail and be okay with failing and to try again, so that when they are in the synchronous or hopefully live situations at times, they'll have more confidence. But it's super difficult, Jimmy, to back to your question about, like, what are the tools to invest in? They're still being developed, I think.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And I think that's what we talked about earlier on too, is like a lot of the solutions, they're either, they're virtual, like you said earlier, they were, thought with an in-person first and virtual experience second, or you have experiences that were just for virtual that hadn't really figured out the in-person part, and they're trying to tack it on. And so really, I think there's this ability for a new company to come in and from scratch say we're going to be building this hybrid type approach, right? And I think that was kind of what we talked about earlier as well. And I think that's a great example of where it needs to go. And this is just kind of some personal examples from class. Like what we do internally is we have, one of the things that came up from Daryl here was, a key fact by Marsha: virtual business relationship building is difficult. And I think that's true. And like I've been fortunate to be on this team for 5 months. I've actually haven't had a chance to meet my teammates in person yet. And that's interesting. It's different than what I've typically been doing at other jobs. And so we just started doing things like Friday virtual office hours, and you can go in and join at any time. The team will be there. You don't have to have your camera on, which we found sometimes fatigue from the camera where you're staring at yourself all day is actually one of the barriers, right? But having the ability to kind of get in that room and then ask questions organically that kind of share your water cooler discussion and kind of try to build a relationship that's not just about, the work that we're doing, but also a personal way. So, really being purposeful and being intentional with our time, I think is really part of that equation. And then hopefully technology to come in to help us out with that as well.
Yeah, Jimmy, it's interesting. I mean, we've spent the last 4 or 5 years trying to teach our business partners that virtual is effective. You can do virtual. You don't need in person. You don't need in person. So, kind of be careful what you ask for. So we've got that. But I think now is the time to capitalize and figure out what is that hybrid model, because I think we all agree there's a lot of things you can do virtual, but if you try to do everything virtual, you're going to lose a lot. So there'll be some big winners out there that actually can figure out how to get that hybrid model working.
Yeah.
There's a great company that that I met a couple months ago, who was in the ed tech space, but then pivoted in October to provide basically like a second city. So like a simulation environment
Cool.
to replicate. It's called Sophia, SOPHYA.ai. But it's just fascinating to think about, like, will that be the future where, the demand for flexibility, especially from employees that have the luxury to choose that, will that demand to be able to be anywhere in the world and have a flexible life outside of work? Can you meet the things that make in-person so special in a simulated world? It's fascinating. I would love to hear people's thoughts on it. It's
reminds me of Ready Player One. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's what that reminds me of. Sorry. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, I sure don't know the answer on that, but while we're talking about cool new technologies out there for human connection, there's one I saw that I think is so cool on building human skills, interpersonal skills, which is, they're called immersion, and it is AI-driven role play with, I think it's a real person on the other side, but it's avatars engaging with each other. And then you come out of role and you get feedback from the coach, but you're actually practicing the experience. And I thought that was also super cool in terms of creating a safe environment for practice that you can do from anywhere, right? That's the kind of thing you always had to be in person to do. So anyway.
The interesting thing about immersion is, I think Bill Gates Foundation put money in, I think it was South Florida or maybe Central Florida. And what they really found out is that when you do a role play with a peer, there's this, it doesn't seem real, but if you do a role play with an avatar that's played by a peer, it is so much real. And I joke around because we've had immersion at Comcast. I remember when they first did the demo, they did Who Wants to Volunteer, right? So of course, I set it up, my name came up, and I got thrown in some employee that just got in a fight in the break room. And to this day, I could feel the hair at the back of my neck raise as I'm sitting there. And I got my peers, other glass offices looking at me, kind of trying to make me laugh. And I was just like, this is intense. Like, this lady is very mad at me, and we're having a serious discussion about what just happened in the lunchroom. It is pretty cool. It's one of the fastest growing companies. I saw something go out the other day. Immersion's a great new technology.
Yeah, I actually have a similar experience, Dave. When they were first starting out, I met them because I was in a similar space in our ed tech, and they had me teach a class, a 4th grade class, I think it was, because they were using it for teacher development. And I got destroyed by these students. And I was a teacher for 5 years, and I remembered that experience more than I do my 5 years in Teach for America and KIT, which I had some tough classes that also destroyed me. So I'm a firm believer in this, with the human in the loop behind the avatar.
And since then, your kids have not looked at you the same way, Emily, right? They're like, we own you, Emily.
Totally. My real kids destroy me too, but that's another story.
I was going to say, to go the opposite of technology way, but when you talk about ways to engage people on synchronous, right? Learning, and you think about role plays, I mean, this is the tactic level, but one of the things we found at McKinsey, to your point about peer role plays and artificiality of it, the most impactful ones were what we always called reverse role plays. So ours were often you as a consultant with you as a client, and you would use a situation that you've got coming up, but you would actually play the client and somebody else would be you. And so you got to feel the impact of different strategies, and there's no reason you can't do that through Synchronous. In fact, some of the executive coaching certification programs do that. But it's a really powerful way to learn. So,
well, one more thing, not to turn this into a merging commercial, but one thing we did a study when we had merging. What we found out is that the people sitting, the person sitting in the chair got X amount of learning on it, but the people observing learned as much or more, because they're trying to scale it. And one-to-one, it's very hard to scale. But if you can put a person in there, have people observe, and then engage them afterwards, they can learn almost as much as a person that's actually doing the role play, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really cool technology. Like I'm really intrigued now. I've never actually had an opportunity to try it, so definitely gonna check that out. And I think we talked about some really good technology that's coming in. We think that can continue to impact the L&D space. The question that I get after that typically is like, well, what are the best way to find the right tools for my employees, or how to train them properly? Like what should we be doing, and what's the best way for me as a leader or as a manager or whoever it may be to go out and find that tool? So David, how would you kind of say what's the best ways to find those tools and how to train your employees?
Well, I guess kind of globally, I think what we have to realize is that you have to work with the learners. A lot of times L&D gets involved, and L&D knows what they want, and L&D understands. And I think what we have to figure out is, yeah, L&D can do some filtering and screening out technologies, but you need to get the learners involved. And then L&D can do, L&D's got to put the process together to create a consistent process to trial it, gather the feedback, measure success before you launch it. But I think L&D just has to get out of the way a little bit on this.
Yeah, and I've had some examples too of like how I've been fortunate enough to do this with Parchment. Was a company I was with before. It's an ed tech company, pretty innovative, and they were trying to find ways like, hey, what could we do to improve our CS team's effectiveness? And we did a hackathon essentially, and we you may have heard of those before, and most of the time it's more of a larger community, but we started small as just our internal folks, and we set like an internal theme of how do we improve the CS team at Parchment. And then we went through and had, all the topics come up. And at the end of it, we actually identified either, hey, we can build this solution. It was a really awesome solution of rating the free lunches we got on Fridays. So very important. But, at the same time, it was really cool to go through and see like one of the examples of where we, could either build something or technology could come in and kind of help us out. So that's one way I've seen that done as well from like a tactical standpoint. I don't know if there's any other examples from the panel.
I was just going to say from my perspective, and I've not been in the same position as Dave and Barone from maybe assessing to bring in solutions for a larger group. But there are, I don't know if it's as relevant for the corporate, but at least in higher ed, I think they have some. There's like great product indexes that you can see. So there's EdSurge does a good job of breaking down what products are out there and classifying them and tagging them. I guess in the corporate space, you could look at like G2 and Dave and Marcia, are there like places like clearinghouses that people can go, or do you adopt the tech more from word of mouth? I sold to Dave, so I like just hounded Comcast.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have our process in place before we let you in.
It was very ad hoc.
Emily, the thing is, you talk about an open space. I don't know it. I would say go to Josh Burson. But that's not a very efficient tool for identifying technologies. And I don't know of an efficient way.
Well, you go to the ATD floor where there's literally 500 vendors there, and you walk out of there going, there's like 8 different flavors, but 50 people doing it with their own nuance. But you can go there. That's probably a great way to see all those technologies out there, but it is extremely overwhelming because there's a lot of similarities and nuances that you might not get in a 20-minute, 30-minute conversation at the booth.
If anybody wants a technology, I saw one last week called DPOW, which is great. It's not sexy, but it helps people capture skills, and it leverages like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So it'll take a video of it, and then it'll break it into chunk size video for you, and so save that enormous amount of time that L&D shops have to take of creating good content, and they'll close caption it, they put it in different languages, and they're just a lovely team. But I think it's a technology that I would look at from a, how do we deliver learning that people can just consume through video? It's not to the point that Marcia was talking about earlier, and Dave with the 21st century learning skills, but it's a great time saver for content.
It's about simplicity, right?
Mm-hmm. And capturing that internal expertise to then share more broadly with everybody from this perspective of the novices learning and getting access, especially in a remote world.
Yeah, well, I love that. That's super interesting. And I do think, those tools that actually save us time like that are critical. And then crowdsourcing, like the hackathon ideas, like sometimes, to Dave's point, getting out of our own way sometimes in L&D and just sourcing it from our employees. And then, yeah, the G2 crowds of the world, the software advice, the Capterra, those type of individuals are the other ones that I've seen, individuals be able to find and kind of do some of their own digging. So a lot of good stuff in there. The last question I have on this section is really kind of more around, maybe Emily, something for you, which is where are we, where's the largest investment in technology for L&D, like maybe that you've seen or that you're hearing about? Also could be a hard question, so feel free to pass on that too.
Yeah, I can't answer exactly what it is. I'm actually still trying to formulate from an investment perspective, what is our thesis from a perspective of like future of work, future of education? And I feel like there's such a paradigm shift. There's certain things that we'll look for, but there's a shift happening that I feel like I'm not bright enough to know what's going to be on the other side of this. Although I think it's going to be pretty amazing. I just don't know exactly what it is. But from an investment perspective, we see a lot of point solutions. So not in this space in particular, not a lot of end-to-end solutions, which may be okay for the market. It's not great for an investment because it may not be as large as we would like. But for a perspective of what the market needs, it may be the right thing when you think about future work and future of education. I think from like on a subtopic of what we're looking for is really like technology that will facilitate stronger feedback loops and relationships between the educational institutions and the companies. So how do you blur those lines so schools can more quickly adapt their curriculum to ensure that people are ready for the workforce. So that's something that's really interesting. Any tools, like I've said that this is, I'm like a broken record on this, so that will support development of 21st century skills. So you said, the hackathon, Jimmy. So that to me is like, how do you build collaboration? So if there's a technology that can do something like what you did at Parchment, I think it was, you said, that'd be amazing. But also like, how do you support, and this goes to Marcia's talking about electronic arts, like play-based learning, because the things that my preschoolers are learning are the things that they're going to need to be really successful in this conceptual era that we're living in, that isn't about just like consuming knowledge, but it's actually applying it to like keep up with how fast paced our world is. And then also like, how do you have technology to help like deep self-directed exploration, like when somebody's getting a PhD in something so they can be the scientist that creates a vaccine for a pandemic. So I'm thinking about all of those things, but I don't have a very clear thesis on exactly what we're looking for. But we are seeing a ton of really interesting point solutions, but that's hard from an investment perspective.
Yeah, stars are hopefully aligning to get something more end to end and kind of address more of it. But I think that was a really good perspective. A quick question that we had here from Jenny was, what was the tool that you just mentioned around the content that automatically being kind of indexed? Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Deep. So D as in David, EEP as in Peter, how, like kind of know how, but it's a deep how. So
Deep how, got it.
Yeah, Deep how. And if anybody wants an introduction to them, just, you can reach out to them or let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn or my work email. There's my little sign. It's called Osage.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think we'll move into the next and final slide here. And as a reminder, folks, continue to add Q&A and just add the questions into that bottom section. We appreciate all the questions we've gotten so far. Yeah, so the last one is around collaborative learning. So just the use of collaborative learning instead of maybe the way that we've done it in the past, which is maybe more of a one-directional type thing sometimes. And so, you know, what are some of the barriers, I think, to collaborative learning that remote work has lifted? And Marcia, I think we'll start with you for this one.
So, sorry. You know, one of the things we had challenges with at McKinsey was global delivery with equal quality. I think I was talking about that before. And a remote and hybrid environment let us take in-person classes that were formerly regional with very fragmented faculty. That number one got low participation because you needed to take a week off work. And number two, the delivery quality was uneven. And move it. So for example, a tech boot camp, as we bring in more, as we're doing more tech work, our general consultants need to be able to engage and know concepts like agile and stack and et cetera. And anyway, and so they moved that tech boot camp to be a hybrid model with synchronous across regions, you know, multiple synchronous to get the whole world in. But again, cross collaboration and the best of faculty to do those synchronous sessions so that you could get the same quality. And then it also provided the opportunity for, I think, David, you were talking about the individualized learning paths, and folks in between would pursue those topics that were most important and most interesting to them. They didn't all have to march.
Nope, a little frozen there, I think, actually.
Maybe one of the barriers could be internet connection.
Definitely a barrier right there, I think. All right, so I think we'll give her a minute just to come back. Would anyone like to add anything on that topic, which is, you know, what are the barriers to collaborative learning that remote has helped lift?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the barriers, at least we saw at Comcast, was there was always a barrier saying, you know what, I can't manage people remotely, I can't train people remotely. So that was so much work, and we couldn't get some of the benefits. And now that they see they're doing it, some of the benefits they're seeing is obviously the simple decrease in real estate costs, but it's also opening up hiring geographies. So in the past, you think about it, if you had a call center of 200-300 people in a town somewhere, you could only probably recruit 20-30 minutes away. Now people are going, hey, if I can onboard people and coach people remotely, maybe I can open up my talent pool, and they're bringing in better people because of that. So that's, I think, it's one of the things where I think people were afraid to go there. I think that's got them over the hump, and now people are seeing values on the other side of it.
Awesome. All right, it looks like we've got Marcia back. Marcia, welcome back. We were talking about how that's one of the barriers, good internet connection, which is the truth.
Universal broadband.
Awesome. So the next question I'd kind of go into is, you know, and this is actually coming back to you, Marcia, again, which is kind of how does remote/hybrid learning lend itself to a successful collaborative learning environment? And just picking over, maybe talking a little bit about the communities and the dream team.
Sure. So another thing we did at McKinsey, and in that context, but I think it's probably true for a lot of the participants here, operating in a very global context. And we, at one point, using really moderated asynchronous with some synchronous connections, did what we called the dream teams, where there was coming out of our people's experience surveys, we found that there are myriad reasons that people were at McKinsey and what they wanted to get out of it, what the value proposition of being there was to them. And it ranged from passionate about client impact to passionate about becoming a deep expert in something, to passionate about opportunities for entrepreneurship. Those that actually said lifestyle, that they believed the flexibility of a consulting model should allow for good lifestyle, even if it doesn't deliver all the time. And we created what we call dream teams around each of those dreams that were really peer coaching forums, where folks could get together and moderated quite often to facilitate the conversation, moderated both live and asynchronous, around what they've experienced, the challenges they have. They could whine, but also how to look for opportunities to get more of what you want out of McKinsey. It was extremely successful. And I thought a nice example of peer coaching.
Love it. Any other examples from the group? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a tech perspective, there's another company I met a couple of months ago, a really, really bright founder called Riff, RIFF Analytics. And it integrates, I'm probably going to butcher it to a degree, but basically it integrates with whatever platform you're on that you're collaborating on or having a meeting on. And it leverages the power of artificial intelligence to measure how people are interacting and communicating. And then it gives you that feedback, which is like fantastic from a perspective of like just quick feedback loops so people can grow and develop, but also it's really focused on feedback around how are you collaborating? Are you letting people speak? Are you letting, our different voices are being heard, or so on and so forth. There's a lot more to it than I'm saying, but it's interesting from a perspective of the question, Jimmy, with the barriers. It's like technology is breaking down the barriers to improve collaborative learning in a remote space, because there's no way you could do that if everybody was in person. So that's just another fascinating thing to me about what technology can do from helping us with those types of skills.
Yeah, I mean, something simple that we've done in class is like we've got the ability to have the animations, of course, or I should say the kind of the feedback you can give in real time.
Yeah.
We've kind of enhanced that so you can give feedback directly to the presenter. So then maybe your feedback's not seen by everybody, but you actually can give real time, like, hey, you're speaking too fast or too slow, or I'd like to ask you a quick question. And like there's different ways to communicate. And then there's also like this engagement type bubble that is around the individual. So if you're in a meeting, the more individual talks, that engagement bubble will change from red to green to yellow. So you can understand like, hey, in this meeting, I've got about 6 people who haven't said a word. Like I'd love to get their input, and you can kind of check that as you go through. So that's some of the ways that we're trying to do that in class as well. That's
really smart. So is the facilitator seeing that dashboard, or each individual gets to see?
Just the facilitator at this point in time. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really
It's been interesting ways. To your point, like technology needs to figure out ways to enhance this, and then to create, I love the way you guys are saying it, those quick, immediate feedback loops. And I think like technology can give us with AI and the business intelligence that can be driven from interactions inside of data-driven interactions, I should say, and give us those insights fairly quickly, actually, and sometimes in real time to help us do that. So just wanted to bring those little examples for those who haven't seen the platform yet and what we're trying to do.
Well, it's funny, Emma, because you talk about, I think where you're probably going is the teachers see it, do the people see it? So it'd be interesting if, you think you're engaging, but you're not. And the whole story, if we're measuring it, it gets done kind of thing. So it'd be interesting if you flipped it and let the people see, and someone might be like, wow, I guess I'm kind of dominating this conversation. I'm green, everyone else is red. And versus people going, oh, I thought I was a big part of the conversation. I'm at the small end. So, I mean, it could actually produce more level collaboration amongst the classroom if they could see it themselves. So it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think that self-awareness of individuals, like sometimes you don't have that self-awareness, and just bringing that awareness to an individual, maybe that does change their behavior a little bit to be more favorable if I'm over dominating a conversation or whatever it may be. But really good points. I like it. Anything else you want to add on that before we go to our next question? I think it's going to be our final question. We do have about 10 minutes left here today, and I want to make sure we are aware of everybody's time. Awesome. So the last one I have here is to you, David. It's around like kind of how, like, what are tools instructors can lean on to enhance hybrid learning? So I know with your time at Comcast, you have a good amount of examples. So just wanted to open it up and start with you today.
Yeah, I mean, we at Comcast, we had probably over 350 trainers, of which most of them did a lot of virtual training. We actually had a class for virtual facilitation. So, part tools, part how to facilitate, because we did see some of the trainers preferred to be in front of the classroom, but really didn't like virtual facilitation. So part of it is the instructor bringing it to life and understand the tools. But it's interesting with the pandemic, we've used Teams a lot. We've also used WebEx, and at least my experience has been the Teams experience on the video was so much better than the WebEx. But all the trainers loved using WebEx because of the tools that were in WebEx. The breakout rooms, the annotation tools, the whiteboards, using whiteboards for people to do teach backs. So they would go to that, but a lot of people didn't like it because it was just so complex to do. So I've never used Adobe, but I know WebEx is not real simple doing breakout rooms. We actually would have to have a trainer and a producer a lot of the time work together to pull that out. But I mean, there are some tools out there they could use. Another thing they use, I mean, we are very Kahoot happy. We love Kahoot quizzes. The learners love Kahoot quizzes. It's a great way to either ice break to get things going or kind of recap the day. That's worked very well. And something that I think I'm kind of interested to see where this falls out, because pre-pandemic, we were investing a lot in Cisco classrooms. And what that was, it wasn't the one-to-one like at Zoom. It was connecting a group of people to another group of people. So we could do a class with 15 people in Philadelphia and 15 people in California. We had cameras that would follow the presenter around. It was very interesting, but it was very costly. So I'll be interested to see if post-pandemic, if people go, it's worth the effort to connect classes together, or do I connect a bunch of individuals? So that'll be kind of interesting. But I mean, as far as really enhancing hybrid learning, there's some tools out there, but I think the key is making sure your trainers understand that and how to use the tools, and they're trained on that, because we've had regular instructor-led classes, we've moved over to virtual, and we just told the trainer, make it virtual. And they figured out ways to, thumbs up buttons, voting, pointing, all this stuff to really make it more virtual. So there's tools out there, but the trainers are a key part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the question too, your question about one-to-one or connecting classrooms is something that we're truly tackling in the education market, listening to higher education speak about how they go back. And, they've always had an online, kind of what we talked about. They always were focused on their in-person, but we've had these online schools for a while in higher ed. And now it's a major focus, right? And so how do we actually adapt it and change it? And what's the right way to do that? Is there a flex environment where we're bringing, half the campus on physical campus each week, and then the other half is that virtual, and maybe it flips during the semester? Like, all of these different things are kind of being discussed right now, and how we continue to provide what we did, because I think a lot of people enjoyed the flexibility inside of the last year or so. In some instances, like my wife's super extroverted, so we've been dying to get out, but like, I think a lot of people at the end of the day realize from a working environment, like I can't imagine myself personally going back full time 5 days, even though that's what I was prior to the situation. So we have a lot of those questions to figure out, to how do we make this an equitable, going back to what we said earlier on, that I'm not having like this head at the end of this table that's a second-class citizen, right? And make it more like I'm part of this, and it's an environment that is acceptable to be at home, and that it's normal, and you hold just as much, I think, authority in conversations and so on with the technology that continues to enhance. So really good discussion today. Is there anything that anyone wants to add before we end, or if there's any last minute questions from the the attendees, please drop them in there as well. But I'd open it up to the panelists here before we go.
I personally, and I think all of us have said it in different ways, think this is the most exciting time in technology-driven learning in my 30-year career. In some ways, the technologies have been out there and there hasn't been the pull for them, or really creative thinking in how to use them. And now we're seeing the pull. We're seeing it create demand for things that don't exist. We're seeing it make what we do better by being able to tie it to work and over time. Like, I feel like this is the moment to be in a corporate role in L&D. with kind of the world as your oyster to give or take budget to figure out how to really do this well.
Yeah, I'll just second that. It's just an incredibly exciting time. I feel quite grateful that I'm in my current role because I get to see so many exciting solutions from really passionate entrepreneurs that are thinking about both the K-12 space and post-secondary and work-based learning, and like seeing that every day. It gives me a lot of hope that we will not just revert back to this industrial age design of knowledge transfer so that we have good citizens, but that we're actually designing our workplace and our schools so that that all of us as individuals can kind of thrive in this which I said earlier, this fast-paced world that really relies on how we work together well to solve problems. So it's super exciting time. And if anybody sees anything really exciting, send them my way, because that's all I like doing all day, is looking at these solutions. And I'll do the same. I'll share them out as well.
Yeah, it's right. Interesting, because I think you've always heard this is coming in 2 or 3 years, and then it really comes in 8 or 9 years, either the bots or this, or the job's gonna be replaced. But I think this is a little different. I think what we're gonna see is, with this hybrid and virtual facilitation, I think the world is gonna change in 1.5 years or 2. I think it's gonna happen really quick, because everyone got a glimpse of this through the pandemic, and now I think it's a mad sprint right now. And it's not about creating some new AI technology. It's about taking some of the stuff we have and combining it all together to create this hybrid. So it's going to be interesting to see who the winners and the losers are over the next couple of years, but there's going to be a lot, I think, in this space. And I'm sure Emily will be evaluating all of it.
And sending them our way. I heard her. I will hold her to that too. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for your time today, Marcia, David, Emily. Great conversation. We really appreciate you taking, your busy schedules, busy people. Really appreciate your moments to share your information with us. So thank you so much from all of us at class and from everybody who attended today. And we'll hopefully talk to you guys again soon.
Hey, thank you, Jimmy. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.